You're 31 years old, sitting in your car in a parking lot, and you just did the math for the third time this week. Same numbers, same result. You have less than $4,000 saved, and somehow that number feels both impossible to grow and impossible to live without. Everyone around you is either pretending they have it figured out or quietly drowning in the same silence you are. Here's the part nobody says out loud. 30 is not late. 30 is not behind. 30 is the exact moment most people finally have enough pain, enough clarity, and enough income to actually start. But almost nobody uses it. They waste it on guilt instead of action. And guilt has never built a single dollar of wealth in the history of money. If you want to see what actually changes when you decide 30 is your starting line instead of your deadline, stay until the end. This is the part most people skip, and it's the part that determines everything. Picture two versions of you, same age, same starting salary, same city. The only difference is what happens in the next 10 years, starting today. Version 1 keeps doing what feels safe, pays the minimum on debt, keeps money in a checking account earning nothing, buys the slightly nicer apartment because 31 feels like an age where you're supposed to have arrived somewhere, tells himself investing is for people who already have money to spare. This version of you isn't reckless, he's just frozen. And frozen, compounded over a decade, looks identical to failure. Version 2 does almost nothing dramatic. He doesn't quit his job, he doesn't start a business he's not ready for, he doesn't day trade his way to a yacht. He does something far less exciting and far more dangerous to the life he used to have. He automates 20% of his income into investments before he ever sees it, and he refuses to negotiate with himself about it. That's the entire fork in the road, not intelligence, not luck. Just one decision, repeated without exception, while the other version negotiates every single month. Now watch what 10 years of that one decision actually does, because the numbers are where most people stop paying attention, and that's exactly why most people stay poor. If version 2 invests roughly $800 a month starting at 31 into something boring like a diversified index fund averaging historical market returns, by 41, he's not looking at the $800 times 12 times 10 that his brain wants to calculate. He's looking at something closer to $140,000. Not because he got smarter, because money left alone stops behaving like money and starts behaving like a second income that never sleeps, never complains, and never asks for a raise. Version 1, the frozen one, has whatever's left in checking after rent and impulse and I'll start next month. Historically, that number is close to zero, not because he's stupid, because inaction is not a neutral choice. Inaction is a decision to let someone else's economy happen to you instead of building your own. This is the part that should make you uncomfortable, because it's not about the past. It's about right now, while you're watching this. The wealthy don't actually start earlier than you think. Most self-made millionaires didn't inherit a head start. What they had was a different relationship with discomfort. They treated investing like a bill that was non-negotiable, the same way rent is non-negotiable, the same way you'd never casually skip a car payment. Poor financial outcomes are rarely caused by poor income. They're caused by treating wealth building as optional and everything else as mandatory. You've been taught to see your 30s as a countdown to settling down, to having it figured out, to being embarrassed if you're not where you should be. That countdown is a trap built by comparison, not by math. Math doesn't care what age you started. Math only cares about two things: how much you commit and how long you leave it alone. Let that sink in for a second, because it changes the entire emotional weight of starting now instead of regretting later. If you wait until 35 to start that same $800 a month, you don't just lose 4 years. You lose the 4 years where compounding was doing the heaviest lifting, quietly, in the background, while you weren't paying attention. By 65, a 31-year-old start versus a 35-year-old start isn't a small gap. It's often a difference of well over $100,000, sometimes far more, depending on returns. 4 years of hesitation can cost you more than a decade of effort later tries to recover. This is why financially successful people obsess over starting dates more than starting amounts. They understand something most people never learn until it's too late. Time is the one input in wealth building you can never buy back. You can earn more money later. You can cut expenses later. You cannot manufacture more years for your money to grow. So why does almost nobody act on this, even after hearing it? Because the truth about your 30s is brutal, and it has nothing to do with markets. The real obstacle isn't your salary. It isn't your debt. It's the quiet psychological lie that says you need to feel ready before you start. You don't. Readiness is not a financial requirement. It's an emotional excuse dressed up as caution. The people who build wealth in their 30s usually started while still scared, still in debt, still confused about half of what an index fund even was. They didn't wait for clarity. They built clarity by moving. Clarity is a result of action, not a prerequisite for it. There's another layer to this most people never examine. Your 30s are also the decade where your career income tends to climb the fastest, year over year, of any decade you'll work through. That means the gap between what you earn and what you spend has more room to widen than it ever will again, if you let it. Most people respond to a raise by upgrading their apartment, their car, their dinners, out. The version of you who builds wealth responds to a raise by keeping the lifestyle flat and redirecting the difference. It's not deprivation. It's just refusing to let your spending rise at the same speed as your income, because that gap is where every dollar of future freedom actually comes from. Here's the uncomfortable mirror moment. If you're 30, 33, 36 right now, and you've been telling yourself you'll start once things settle down, ask yourself honestly, when was the last time things actually settled down? They don't. Life doesn't hand you a calm, stable, perfect entry point. You take the entry point you have today, messy as it is, or you keep waiting for a moment that statistically never arrives. This is where most people's story collapses. They wait for permission, they wait for a raise, a bonus, a better time, and the better time becomes 35, then 40. Then it becomes a different kind of math entirely, the math of trying to catch up instead of the math of letting time work for you. There's a quieter cost to waiting that almost nobody talks about, and it isn't financial at all, it's psychological. Every year you delay starting, the gap between where you are and where you think you should be gets wider, and that gap becomes a story you tell yourself about who you are. I'm bad with money, I'm behind, I'll never catch up. None of that is true. It's just unautomated debt sitting in your identity instead of your bank account. The moment you start, even small, that story stops being true, because action rewrites identity faster than guilt ever could. But there's another version of this story, and it's the one that should actually keep you up tonight, in the good way. If you start now, at whatever age you're at, with whatever amount you can actually sustain, you are not behind, you are early. Early relative to the version of you that waits even one more year. Early relative to most people who will spend their 30s scrolling, comparing, and assuming someone else already won the timing game. The uncomfortable truth is this. Building wealth in your 30s isn't about discovering some secret strategy rich people know and you don't. It's about doing the unglamorous, repetitive, boring thing for years while everyone around you chases excitement. Automate the investment. Increase it slightly every time your income rises. Avoid lifestyle inflation that eats the gap before it can compound. Let the decade do what decades do when you stop interrupting it. You don't need a windfall. You don't need to be a genius. You need 10 years of not quitting on a decision you made on an ordinary Tuesday, sitting in a parking lot, finally tired of doing the math and getting the same answer. The version of you at 41 who automated $800 a month starting today isn't impressive because he got lucky. He's impressive because he stopped negotiating with comfort. He treated his 30s not as a deadline to panic about, but as the longest runway he'll ever have again. And here's the part that ties it all together. Wealth built this way doesn't arrive as a single dramatic moment. There's no day where you wake up and suddenly feel rich. It arrives the way most real change arrives. Quietly, in a number, on a statement that slowly stops looking like a typo and starts looking like a fact about your life. One day, you check the account expecting 4 figures and see 5. Nothing about that morning felt different. That's the part people who haven't done it never understand, and the part people who have done it never forget. So the real question isn't whether 30 is too late. The real question is what you're going to do with the next 10 years that's different from the last 10. Because in a decade, you will be in your 40s regardless. The only variable left to decide is which version of that future you're building, starting from right now. If this hit something real, you already know which version you've been living. The only thing left is deciding which one you keep choosing tomorrow.